Today's webinar is a discussion on the continuing drought and landscape water conservation. Build a Green is a nonprofit membership-based organization that focuses on providing resources to building professionals, architects, engineers, contractors, realtors, appraisers, and homeowners who are searching for healthy, resource-efficient buildings and design. We host a few certification trainings that some of you in the audience may have taken and work hard to supplement those trainings with additional educational opportunities, such as these webinars and conferences. We often try to present the latest technologies and design techniques to open the discussion for the future of green building. Innovative water conservation and energy efficiency solutions like passive heating, solar water heating, electric charging stations, drain water heat recovery systems, and living roofs have all begun to take hold in our cities and are making their way into all parts of the state. Homeowners are not only soon to become better educated about resource conservation and energy efficiency, but they will begin to look for properties that reflect those values back to them. Landscaping is a particularly timely topic as California continues to struggle with the worst drought in the state's history. If you or your renters are millennials or conscious of the effects of the drought, they're also particularly sensitive to energy and water conservation. Additionally, innovative water conservation and energy efficiency solutions like passive heating, solar water heating, things like that have all begun to take hold in our cities. Today's presenter is Vanessa Lindores, a senior associate at Gates & Associate. Vanessa is a senior associate with a lead AP in building design and construction, a Bay-friendly rater, and a member of the Bay-Friendly Raters Council. Vanessa's projects include planning, design guidelines, construction documentation, and plan review. She specializes in the regulatory aspects of sustainability. She's also worked closely with StopWaste.org and the Bay-Friendly Coalition to evolve the Bay-Friendly program and support materials. Please join me in welcoming Vanessa.
Great, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here to talk about this. This is an important topic for us here at Gates & Associates. We're landscape architects, land planners, and urban designers. And obviously, the use of water in the landscape is of great interest to us. We do a range of public and private projects from streetscapes and parks to residential developments. We also prepare park and rec master plans and that sort of thing. So the use of water, the use of turf and fields is obviously extremely important to our work, and we know it's important to our clients, so we work very hard to stay current on what's happening in this field. We're very strong proponents of sustainable design of the landscape, and in particular Bay-friendly landscapes. We've been involved with Stop Waste for several years now as that program has developed, and now as it's been taken over by the Bay-Friendly Coalition, we're big supporters of making sure that the landscapes we design and implement are as sustainable as possible in a variety of ways. And we'll talk a little bit more about Bay-Friendly as we move through the presentation. So the agenda for today's talk, we're going to try to touch lightly on a number of issues. I won't be able to get into things very much in detail, so if there's additional questions that we can follow up with, we'd be happy to do that. And the reality is that some things are still in flux, which I'll be talking about shortly as well. So the plan is to talk a little bit about the existing regulation, the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance that's now in effect, the governor's recent executive order, and the draft updated Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, which came out of that executive order. We'll talk a little bit about recycled water, a little bit about synthetic turf, some ideas for existing landscapes, and then just a quick review with some best practices. So many of you may know, or you may not, that effective January 1st, 2010, all municipalities in California, by state mandate, were required to adopt a water efficient landscape ordinance. They could use the model that was prepared by the state, or they could create their own ordinance that was equally as stringent or more stringent. At that time, the threshold for a project being subject to that ordinance was a project of 2,500 square feet or greater that required a building or landscape permit or had to go through design review through a city. That's what triggered the ordinance. Some of the key elements at that time that were part of the ordinance were automatic ET-based irrigation controllers. Automatic means they can be scheduled, and ET-based simply means weather-based. Either it's connected to a computer that controls the controller based on weather information it receives through a subscription, or it has a moisture sensor, a rain sensor that will shut the irrigation off in the case of a rain event. Another key element of the ordinance was that plants had to be grouped by hydrozones. So this is a very small example of a much larger project. Now, at the time the original ordinance went into effect, this one front yard would not have been subject to it because the square footage is too low. But as a larger development, overall this project was subject to it. And so this is how we typically indicate our hydrozones. We have to show the areas of low, moderate, and high water use, and that is required by the ordinance. Narrow and irregularly shaped areas were not permitted to be irrigated with spray irrigation any longer to avoid kinds of things that you see in the left-hand picture there, to make sure that there was that overspray was minimized. Turf on slopes greater than 25% was no longer permitted, or in areas less than 8 feet wide. And no spray within 24 inches of impermeable surface was permitted unless those areas clearly drain to the landscape. Now, some of these things had qualifiers that allowed you to show a design case that clearly illustrated that runoff wasn't happening. But in general, these were the requirements. A water budget has to be submitted for all projects. And I've sort of highlighted a few of the key elements of the water budget. You identify the total landscape area. You calculate, based on that area, an estimated total water use, which is at the bottom, and you compare that to a maximum applied water allowance, which is calculated through a rather complex formula, but it gives you a number. In this case, it was 10,582 gallons. This happens to be the water budget for the front yard that I just showed, and you compare that with the estimated total water use, and that estimated total water use must be less than the maximum applied water allowance. So recently, as we all know, the governor was in Lake Tahoe area in the Sierras where there should have been a great deal of snow on the ground, and there wasn't. So he mandated a 25% reduction in potable urban water use statewide through February 2016. Now, certain elements of this executive order are specific, and some of them are left to your local water purveyor to determine how they achieve that 25%. And most of us, I think, have received something from whether it be Alameda County Water District or East Bay Mud or DSRSD, that is your water provider. Most of us have received something in the mail that's talking about what those requirements are, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well. One key element of the executive order is that local agencies are to replace 50 million square feet of ornamental turf with drought-tolerant landscape over the near term. So this is an example. This is actually at the College of Alameda, and this is an example of such a turf replacement project. It is no longer permitted to irrigate the front yard of a newly constructed home with potable water unless it is delivered by drip irrigation or microspray. Another element of the new order is that water suppliers are required to adopt rate structures, fees, penalties, and such to ensure that this water conservation target is met. An example is that East Bay Mud has an excessive water use ordinance they've just put into place, which includes the $2 penalty for each unit over 80 units per billing cycle. And there's a system of warnings, and other local purveyors have similar types of systems, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other things that are being used in a little bit. Another element of the executive order was a requirement to update that Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance that I just reviewed to make it even more stringent and increase the standards. So, and 4 specific elements of that ordinance were to be addressed. These include more efficient irrigation systems, the use of gray water, on-site stormwater capture, and the limitation of turf. These are 4 elements that were specifically identified as targets to discuss in the new updated ordinance. So this ordinance has just recently, a draft of this ordinance has just recently been released. It's in a public comment period right now. Some elements of it are quite controversial, and there's a lot of discussion, a lot of interested stakeholders who are now providing their comments on the ordinance. So I'm going to go through a few of the proposals that have been made that are different from the existing ordinance. Whether or not all of these end up being in the final update, we don't know yet, but it is still up for discussion, and if anything triggers your interest and you want to make a comment, I believe you're still able to comment on these proposed changes. So one of the key elements is reducing that size threshold from 2,500 square feet down to 500 square feet. And again, it's still something that if a project is going to be submitted for a permit or has to go through a plan or design review. And just to give you an idea of, what 500 square feet might be, I've just shown a couple of front yard landscapes here. Dedicated landscape water meters are required for residential areas greater than 5,000 square feet and non-residential areas greater than 1,000 square feet, which apparently is now in alignment with the CalGreen requirements. On irrigation systems, they are requiring pressure regulators and master valves. And there's a number of implications of these. I won't go into the details right now. And also flow sensors that detect and report any high flow conditions due to breaks. So basically the concept is to minimize undetected leaks and minimize high pressure situations that aren't necessary, and to identify any irrigation breaks that should be rectified immediately. One of the more controversial aspects of the updated WELO is that they're requiring that precipitation rates may not exceed 1 inch per hour in any portion of the landscape. In addition, they are expanding the minimum width of turf that may be irrigated by spray from 8 feet to 10 feet. And again, the same requirements remain that you may not be spraying adjacent to permeable hardscape with 24 inches. So that remains in effect, unless you can clearly demonstrate that there will be no runoff and everything will drain back into the landscape area. Gray water has been newly added. They are encouraging gray water. They aren't very specific about it. They're just encouraging it. And I know that in San Francisco, one of the supervisors has been working to actually require gray water systems in some areas. So I think this is something that's probably going to get some more attention over the coming months and years. One very positive element of this that, from our perspective, is a new focus on soils. Healthy landscapes are generally, healthy soils are a very important part of healthy and water-conserving landscapes. And we have a real problem with that, with a lack of organic matter in the soil here in the Bay Area and compaction over long periods of time. So this emphasis on creating, on ensuring that soils are friable, that there are pockets and areas for water to remain, and that there is a significant amount of organic matter, if needed, based on a soil test. These all work to help the soil become a sponge. And there's a strong emphasis in landscape sustainability on living soils. And when you have a healthy soil, you just require less fertilizer, you require less water, and you have a healthier system. So from our perspective, this is a very positive element that has been added to the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. They've taken quite a harsh approach to turf in the update. They're limiting residential turf to 25% of the total landscape area, and they are eliminating turf completely in commercial and institutional projects, unless it is a special landscape area. So if it's required for sports or recreation or picnic, or if it's irrigated with recycled water, they do make an exception for that. The purely ornamental turf is no longer permitted. And this can be quite a challenge in large office campuses and educational campuses. If you think about those kinds of spaces and how much of those are often simply blanketed in turf, it does create a challenge for design from our perspective, certainly. They've also reduced the water budget from 70% of the reference ET, which is just basically an amount of water expected for that landscape, to 50% for residential areas and down to 40% for commercial institutional areas. So what they've done is just basically make even more stringent what their previous requirements were in terms of water efficiency. So as I mentioned, each local water purveyor is responsible for addressing their conservation themselves and determining how they exactly want to do it. Some of the mandatory water restrictions imposed by East Bay Mud include watering no more than 2 consecutive days, certain times, no watering within a measurable rainfall. The watering of ornamental turf on public street medians was actually part of the executive order, so that came right out of the executive order. And they've added a surcharge effective July 1st, 2015 as part of their requirement under the executive order. This is an Alameda County Water District table that explains, they have 2 graphics like this. There's one for your domestic, your home water use, and then this is the lawn and landscape restrictions. Some of them are very similar to East Bay mud. Some of them are a little bit different. So everyone needs to kind of figure out what their local requirement is. In fact, I'll just mention that DSRSD, I think, has different requirements. They have been so successful, as I understand, over recent years in conserving that their requirements are a little bit less stringent. They also have a great deal of recycled water available. And in some cases, my understanding is that they're actually providing credits for very low water users. So they've been quite successful. Recycled water is obviously a great resource. It's very important. People are looking at it more and more. This is water that has been treated through a sanitary district, so it is sewer water that has been treated and cleaned and is being used in the landscape. There's a great shift in perception about this. I think a lot of people were resistant to it in the past and are now feeling much more comfortable with the idea, much more comfortable that the water is treated to a very safe level. It is higher in salt content, so that does mean that there has to be a little bit of consideration of your plants. And there's various studies going on right now about how to deal with the salt tolerance or the salt content in recycled water. Some places are working on reducing that salt content, and some are feeling that if you just add more water, you can flush out even more recycled water, that you can actually just add more recycled water to the landscape and flush out some of that salt. There's still ongoing research in this area, but there are resources on the internet about recycled water tolerant plants and ones that don't do well. In particular, redwood seems to be sensitive to recycled water. Synthetic turf is also a very controversial element. It is not addressed in the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. I believe that East Bay Mud is considering doing a pilot project related to synthetic turf. It has obviously some advantages in terms of aesthetics and water use, but there are a lot of concerns about it as well. And the next couple of slides will sort of compare natural turf with synthetic a little bit. I would say from a sustainability perspective, one of the key issues for landscape professionals is that it's not an organic material. It can't naturally absorb and break down spills or messes or anything that drops on it, which can result in odors and requiring cleaning with water and disinfecting. And also it tends to heat up, so it can be responsible for heat islands. And that is a concern. And in general, it doesn't create habitat. It doesn't cool the ground. Although natural turf takes a great deal of water and other additives, it does have a cooling effect. So there is a lot of concern about any approach that just focuses on replacing existing turf with synthetic turf. In general, the preference would be to replace existing turf that is simply for an ornamental purpose with an attractive, drought-tolerant, drip-irrigated landscape system. We wanted to talk a little bit about existing landscapes and how we can approach dealing with existing landscapes and some really low-hanging fruit that may be there to help meet some of our water conservation goals. A number of studies have been done, and this one in particular, oh, sorry about that. This one in particular the Water Efficiency Action Network for the Colorado River Basin states, looked at our traditional ornamental landscape plants, not even drought-tolerant plants, and looked at reducing the water that we apply to them. And it seems that we may believe that these plants need more water than they do. And although they may not get as large, they may do just fine with less water than we've been traditionally applying to them. So as a first step, looking at controller runtimes and programming them to apply less water, maybe on a weaning type of basis. So starting at maybe 95% of what you're doing and then working your way down and seeing how your landscape tolerates that, maybe a very easy and effective way to conserve. Irrigation surveys and audits are also excellent. And I did forget to mention that as part of the original Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, irrigation audits by a certified irrigation auditor are required after the installation of the landscape. And that type of audit looks at the system to ensure that it has been installed and is programmed and is functioning as designed. But we've done a number of irrigation surveys and audits on existing landscapes, and our plan was sort of to look at the existing irrigation system and propose, drought-tolerant plantings and renovations to the landscape that would help them reduce their water use. And what we found was that there are, and these two pictures come from two different audits, what we found was that since a lot of this stuff is happening at night and no one has any idea what's going on out there, that really there's a great deal of potential in just repairing and maintaining existing systems and ensuring that they're not wasting this type of water. So as a first step, that is a great way to go. Then, if you still have a water hogging landscape, moving toward automatic controllers if you don't already have that, rain sensors and flow sensors that automatically shut off the system in the case of a break or a rain event, and of course drip irrigation and high efficiency spray heads that you can actually just transfer out from existing spray. Are all options for reducing water use in existing landscapes. Lawn conversion is something that's becoming, as I've mentioned a few times already, a very major part of our approach to water conservation. We've done it ourselves here at Gates and Associates, and basically, the landscape that you see on the right requires a great deal less maintenance, creates less waste, needs less fertilizer, and uses significantly less water than the landscape on the left. Sheet mulching is also a great way to accomplish this, and it's something very much supported and encouraged by Bay Friendly. It just involves taking, and that's what we did in this case, you just take sheets of cardboard and cover up that lawn in place, cover it with the soil, install the irrigation, and the whole landscape system just happens right over the existing turf, which breaks down and becomes, organic matter in the soil. So again, supporting that healthy living soil that we're so interested in. This is another shot. Other options are creating usable outdoor spaces with that, that former lawn. So I'll just run through really quickly some best practices. A great resource for overall sustainable landscapes is Bay Friendly. They They focus on 7 key principles: landscaping less to the landfill, nurturing the soil, conserving water, conserving energy, protecting water and air quality, and creating and protecting wildlife habitat. This guide is available online, and there are scorecards so that projects, civic and commercial projects, can be rated bay-friendly, and you receive a sign, much like Build It Green is rated. There's sort of a sister framework, but this one focuses on the landscape. So projects can be rated. They receive signage designating them as bay-friendly and showing evidence that this landscape has been designed and installed in a sustainable manner. Bay-friendly is about to launch in the coming months a new scorecard, their version 4 of their scorecard that has been updated with many new. The great thing that makes a challenge is that over time, what used to be an innovative approach becomes typical. It becomes part of legislation like the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance or Cal Green, and so that requires systems like Bay-Friendly to keep raising the bar, which is a wonderful thing. And so they're about to launch a new scorecard to do just that in the coming months. So just a really quick summary of what we've talked about. Obviously, high efficiency irrigation systems, smart weather-based programmable controllers are key to ensuring that the amount of water is applied that you need in the right place on the right plant. Turf only where needed for recreation. The days of front lawns, large front lawns with lawn that no one ever uses are over and should be over in California in this climate. It just doesn't make sense anymore. Save the turf for places where people play or picnic, and allow the rest of the landscape to be something more interesting. Drought-tolerant plant palette is obviously important, and wherever that can be native, climate adapted, and promote beneficial insects like bees that we need so badly right now, is just adds an extra benefit as well. Applying mulch and compost to create that living sponge, that healthy soil, is also a very easy, low-hanging fruit that everyone should be considering in their landscape. And probably this is my final slide, and it is something that I can't emphasize enough, having worked on projects where we did quite a large number of water audits around the Bay Area. And the #1 thing that we can all do to save water is to check our systems, make sure that they're working as they're supposed to be working, and repair any breaks, repair sprinkler heads, and keep the system maintained appropriately. So that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, I would be more than happy to answer.
Great, thank you. What a great presentation, Vanessa. Really great information in there. We actually do have one question that came through. I will encourage, if anyone has any questions, to please submit them by either raising your hand or typing them into the questions pane or the chat pane that came up. So Vanessa, you talked about the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, WELO, and you actually mentioned that the precipitation rate may not exceed 1 inch per hour. But how do you actually control precipitation?
Well, the precipitation rate, when we say precipitation rate, we don't mean rain, if that's what you're asking. The precipitation rate is a term used in irrigation to talk about how much water the system applies. So a sprinkler would apply on the landscape. So they aren't trying to control the rain. They'd be happy for whatever precipitation comes, I think, at this point. But But as far as the system goes, what an irrigation system is allowed to apply on the landscape is being limited to 1 inch.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarification. And then you actually just briefly mentioned a water audit and how important that is, but could you kind of explain a little bit what is involved in a water audit?
Sure. There are different levels, and I would recommend looking it up. The Irrigation Association has a certification program that does this, and you can get more information about it. We do have a landscape irrigation auditor here on staff, and he could tell you more about it. But what I know is that it involves looking at the controller, making sure the controller is programmed appropriately, that the zones are programmed appropriately so that water is being applied the way it is intended and designed, and looking at all of the lines and all of the sprinkler heads and all of the equipment to make sure that there aren't breaks or anything else that would be causing the system not to function correctly. That could mean a plant in the way of a sprinkler head that is making it spray all over the place and not on the landscape area at all. It could be a number of different things. So they basically just come and assess a long checklist of elements in the irrigation system and provide a report, and they can estimate how much water you could be saving if you repair that system.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is sheet mulching with cardboard. What are the potential disadvantages or problems with that?
I'm not aware of major problems with that. We've done it here ourselves. We've been involved in a number of lawn to landscape events or lose your lawn events. There are a lot of resources, particularly at bayfriendlycoalition.org, to help you do it appropriately so that your plants thrive. It depends on what you're planting, how you do it. So in some cases, you apply the cardboard, apply a little bit of compost on top, and plant the plants right in there. Depending on the size of your plants, you cut holes in the cardboard, and you have to carefully arrange your drip irrigation to make sure all of that works together. But it isn't difficult. It's done a lot. And overall, it's a great way to convert lawns because you create no waste, and you use that water hogging lawn as fertilizer for your new landscape, basically.
Great, thank you. And then a question came up. So there's obviously some cities that are offering rebates for switching out your landscape to drought-tolerant plants or just taking out your landscape altogether. Do you know of any statewide rebates or incentives that are available?
I don't know. I'm not aware of statewide incentives. I think the state has taken a more of a direction approach. They are directing your local water purveyors, who are the ones who are actually, responsible for your water bill, to decide that for themselves. So from my understanding is that those rebates come from your local water purveyor.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I'm going to encourage everyone else who's still on the line to submit any last-minute questions that you have. I do want to let you guys know, though, this webinar was sponsored by Greenpoint Rated. It's a program that Build a Green administers, and it's one of the leading green home certification systems in California, with more than 31 homes certified, including multifamily properties and single-family residences. Greenpoint Rated is a simple, affordable, and flexible rating system used by countless builders and developers. It assures residents that the building is healthier, more comfortable, durable, and resource efficient. The Greenpoint Rated team is comprised of leading green building experts, and they helped to put together this webinar series and set the agenda for which sustainability topics are most relevant to developers and managers like yourselves in the audience. You can visit buildagreen.org/greenpoint rated to find a series of checklists to see what kinds of upgrades are factored into a Greenpoint rated certification. You can also find more information on that webpage. And as always, there's always more educational events such as workshops, webinars, and trainings for you to learn more about energy and resource efficient upgrades, including a series of webinars we have coming up. One is called Ideas from an Off-Grid Home. It's a case study on a home in Salinas, California, where a gentleman went completely off the grid, and he's going to lend some expertise to some unconventional design, implementation, and operations that you can do in your next projects. Additionally, we have a webinar on financing options and building your green team, which is a focus on what it takes to really inform the homeowner and develop your team around appraisers, realtors, designers, contractors, all having green building knowledge and how important that is. And additionally, we have another webinar on supporting residential zero net energy through utility programs. So that's a California Advanced Homes Program webinar. We're going to be focusing on some hard to achieve zero net energy measures that you can then ask some specific questions to the program designers. It looks like we have one more question, Vanessa. Any thoughts on in-ground rainwater collection systems versus above-ground rainwater collection in tanks?
Yeah, you know, I'm not an expert on gray water, so I wouldn't want to answer that, I'm afraid. But I think in general we're going to be, you know, focusing on that a lot more, and it's going to be pushed a lot more. So I think that there'll be a lot of resources online. I showed the cover of the design book from the San Francisco area, and it had a lot of information in there. I would refer you to that, but I'm not an expert myself in gray water.
Okay, great, good to know. All right, are there any other last minute questions that you would like to ask? If we can't address any of them online right now, as you submit them, we will definitely send out the answers in the follow-up email, which will also include a recording of today's webinar and the great slide deck that Vanessa put together. I'm going to leave the line open for a few more minutes just in case we do get those questions, but I would like to say thank you to everyone who joined us today for this webinar, and especially thank you to Vanessa for offering her expertise on such an interesting and very relevant topic. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you very much.